Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Muslim CEO show. This is the place for you if you want to become an amazing leader and grow your business or organization to the next level. We do this by learning from those that have been there, done it and bought the niqab. I'm your brother and host, Mohammad Arshad, and today I'm truly honored to have with me the amazing sister Fatima Barkatulla. Assalamu alaikum, sister. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
How are you doing, Sister Fatima?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you well now. How are you doing? Okay, so I'm
fine, alhamdulillah. How are you?
I'm good, alhamdulillah. So I'm super excited to have you on the show because you are one of the sisters that I admire most in the world. I think you've got so much knowledge, so much experience, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you. Now, before I kind of go into it and go into lots of different things, I just want to give everyone a quick overview, a quick introduction in case they don't know you, right? So, Sister Fatima is a qualified Alimah. She is a Da'iyah. She is an author. She's like award-winning. She's also someone I would consider a journalist, and I think you're a real leader, mashallah, for the different sisters out there. So there's a huge amount of history, a huge amount of knowledge, and all this kind of stuff that I want to go into in this call. But before I do that, the first question I wanted to ask you, sister, was what was 10-year-old Fatima like?
10-year-old?
Yeah.
Oh, subhanallah. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. 10-year-old Fatima was a very happy child. I grew up in Hackney, which is like quite a deprived area of London, in a council house. But I thought we were like the richest family in like the world, because of the way my parents never made us kind of feel that we were living without. 10-year-old Fatima was very happy at school. I was taking part in everything I could. I was doing calligraphy. I had an amazing head teacher who really, his name was Mr. Mines, Ken Mines, and he really saw the young people who were at the school and our talent, and he just wanted to nurture that. So I was like the narrator in school play. I was helping with the school magazine, drawing pictures for it and publishing it with the head teacher. And I also, believe it or not, started a little dawah organization in my school, in my primary school in Hackney.
Wow, at like 10, 11?
Quite funny. Yeah, because I think one of the things about my family was that, my dad is a scholar from Deoband.
Yeah.
So he was a mufti. He came to, living in London at that time, so this is like the 80s, I'd say there were a lot of Muslims in Hackney, but they were not necessarily very knowledgeable. So what would happen is I'd go to school and, we had, and they'd have lots of questions, or sometimes they'd have misconceptions about what was Islamic and what wasn't. And so often I would hear things, like I just remember once I came to school after having had a haircut, and all the girls ganged up on me, right, for having a haircut, because they said it's guna, right? Guna. Do you remember that word, guna?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Yeah, so they said to me, it's a sin. And so I would go home and I would talk to my dad and I'd say, Dad, is this true? Is it a sin? What? All these misconceptions that people kept, their parents had told them. I would ask my dad, and then I'd go back to school with knowledge and inform people of what the truth was. And also there were non-Muslims in my class who would ask questions. For example, when I started wearing hijab, they would ask questions. So I figured that since naturally my dad was a knowledgeable person and, I had knowledge that I could share with people, I just wanted to galvanize that. And so I started this thing called the M Team. It wasn't very imaginative.
Okay.
I think it's because we used to watch the A Team at the time. You know, the A Team was on TV, so I called it the M Team. And I created one of the great things about my family was my dad ran a computing center, which was quite an amazing thing in those days because not everyone had a computer at home, you know. But we did. We had a computer and we had a printer, a laser printer as well. So what I'd do is I'd write newsletters for the M Team. I made the logo and everything. And I'd print those newsletters, which were just kind of motivational things for mainly the Muslim students at school. And I'm talking primary school here, right? And I'd get these envelopes from my dad's office, fill them, photocopy pictures and books, Islamic books that my dad gave me, children's books, maybe photocopy a chapter, staple it, put it into the envelope, and I would give them out at school. And we literally used to raise our pocket money for charity. We used to do all sorts of little things like that. So I think that's where it all started, you know. In primary school.
That's a very, very
Mashallah.
different story to, I guess, most 10-year-olds, mashallah. So do you remember what you wanted to be at that age?
Yeah. I think, well, I was one of those people who was, alhamdulillah, I did really well at school. I was a straight A student, you know, in secondary school as well. And so I was interested in everything. I have to admit, I was interested in the sciences as well as the arts, as well as, you know, drama even. You know, I was interested in all those kinds of subjects. So when it came to the future, one of the great things about my school, and I think about growing up in London, so by the time I was in secondary school, I lived in Barnet, which is like the opposite of Hackney, you know. It's like a very posh area, very kind of, not many ethnic minorities, but very kind of an aspirational place to live. And by that time, we were in a nice house. We were, you know, going to one of the really good girls' schools. And I think there, kind of, I was nurtured in the sense that my teachers at school never told me that there was anything I couldn't be, which was really great because you can imagine I was like a little hijabi girl, right? And I went to my science teacher one day and I said to him, I really want to be an astronaut. And, you know, like, he didn't laugh at me or he didn't say anything negative. He just really, like, he sat there and he said, okay. Because I was really fascinated by space. I used to buy space books, and my dad also, he nurtured that. He bought me like the Atlas of the Universe, and I was just fascinated by space. And so he said to me, my science teacher said to me, well, you know, most astronauts, and they're usually from like the Air Force. So, yeah.
So he said what? Most astronauts are?
This is before pilots.
Okay.
Pilots of aeroplanes, you know? Like at some point they've learned how to pilot an aeroplane.
Sure. And
they're usually from the Air Force, you know, they're from either the United States Air Force or RAF. So he said, you should probably join the RAF. So I went home and I got the yellow pages. And I looked up the RAF cadets in Finchley, and I actually joined. Amazing. You know,
okay.
It didn't really last very long because I didn't really like that environment. You know, there's a lot of swearing and smoking going on. But that kind of showed you that for me it was like the sky was the limit. Anything that I was really interested in, I knew I could like try to pursue. But in terms of Islamic scholarship, I would say from a very young age, my mum instilled in us a huge respect for scholars, you know. So because my dad was an alim, we always really looked up to him. And I think I grew up with the feeling that being a scholar was the greatest thing, you know. And that's probably something that my mum instilled in me. So I always really wanted to study Islam in depth. In fact, I've still got a diary of when I was like about 12 or 13. And at the back of the diary, I used to write like all my plans and everything that I wanted to do. And I've actually written there that I want to be an Islamic scholar. And I want to spread the message of Islam to women all over the world. I actually wrote that as a teenager. So I think there are various areas that I've been interested in, but Islamic scholarship has always been there, you know.
So, I mean, that's a good point actually to lead on to, because as I understand it, like you've got like 2 Alimiyyah degrees. Instead of like just going simply with one, you had to go and get 2. One's from Ebrahim College, another one's from AlSalam Institute, right? And even now, like you're doing a master's degree at SOAS in Islamic Law, right? So just tell me, like, I mean, obviously you're a mother, you've got children, mashallah, and a husband, and like, how does someone like you, who's busy with obviously looking after her kids and her home and all of that, get 2 degrees, you know, and become an alim?
I think I got married very young. Okay. I was 19 when I got married. So I had just finished my A-levels. But also I had been in Egypt for 2 years. So I'd learnt Arabic. And I just knew it was the right time to get married. And, you know, I had met my husband, alhamdulillah. So I think what happened at that point was I really wanted to get married. And so when I was, having the marriage negotiations, the tea parties, I would say to my husband, and my dad helped me with this, you know, with the communication side of it. I asked him, you know, would he support my Islamic studies? Okay, because that's something long-term that I really wanted to complete. And my husband was really supportive of that. In fact, my Islamic studies is part of my marriage contract. So I do think that really helped, you know, in the sense that it was more like an honorable mention rather than like a condition or something like that, you know. But it was something that my husband, that I had mentioned up front, you know, when we were getting married. My husband was really supportive of that. Of course, when you're 19, you don't realize that when you have children, you're not just going to carry on as normal, you know. Things are going to change. But one of the things I remember my husband asking me in our marriage meetings, he asked, because I think he could see that my studies really meant a lot to me. So he said, what about children and family? You know, like, he wanted to get, I think, an idea of what my priorities were, you know. And I think even from then, I did say to him, look, you know, family is priority. Family is the priority. And so when my children came along, I really did devote my time to my children, especially in their early years. You know, I was very much focused on motherhood. And that meant that usually I know people, you know, in their 20s, graduating, right? In their 20s, and they might be doing their further studies as well, and they might delay marriage. For me, it was kind of the other way around, yeah? So I got married young. I had my first child when I was 21. And so I think I would say I spent the strongest years of my life as a mother, you know, and really like focused on that goal. But at the same time, that didn't mean that I completely stopped all of my studies or, you know, my interests. It's just that I prioritized my children. So one thing that I always say to sisters, you know, when they say to me, especially when they just have children, children, they say, you know, how do you seek knowledge, or how do you do things, other things, you know, when you have children. The first thing I say to them is, look, family is your finest project. You know, your family is a project, and it's worthy of your attention. But my example, from my experience, what I did, for example, while I was literally feeding my babies, right, like literally breastfeeding, I would be listening to lectures in Arabic. Okay, I think I listened to like Arabic lectures over and over again to improve my Arabic. Also in the evenings when my baby was asleep, I would write articles into Islamic magazines. So what I say is that even though I wasn't in a formal institution during those years, what I did do, use other means of studying. And I think we're living in an amazing age, you know, where really, apart from discipline, there's nothing stopping you from seeking knowledge in multiple ways. But then obviously when my children got to a certain age, and opened London, I could see that was my to go to an institute to study with scholars again. But even then, I think, like for example with Ebrahim College, I went there, I actually negotiated with them because, again, the way that their Alimiyyah degree was designed was for a single young person, you know, pretty much, you know, who literally had from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. free, right? And that's the sort of students that were going there. And that's not me, right? Because I had children to pick up from school. So I turned up there and I had my, what you could call elevator pitch ready, right? As to why they should take me on and why they should change their program to fit around me. But at the same time, I said to them, look, I told them what I would do with the knowledge, what I aim to do, and how, you know, I could, if they were a bit more flexible with me, it would really make a difference and I would be able to complete these studies. So what happened was they agreed for me to do 3 days a week, and to do like up to 2 o'clock. So I could always go home to pick up my kids from school. That meant quite a lot of kind of looking at the timetable and making sure that over the years I covered all the subjects that needed to be covered, right? So it took a bit of organizing, but at the same time, it meant that I was not neglecting what I consider to be my most important role, you know? Although it took me longer than the average student to complete my Alimiyyah, right? It nearly double the time, I would say. And that in itself takes a lot of patience because, you know, you're seeing people whiz past you. That's what it feels like, you know, people are whizzing past you. But Brother Muhammad, I remember once reading the story of the hare and the tortoise to my children. And I remember when I was reading the hare and the tortoise, I was just like, although I've read that story so many times, and I'm sure all of us have, right? For some reason, it just really resonated with me. And I remember sitting there thinking, wow, that story means a lot to me. You know, it's really relevant to me. And what I realized was that, you know, the hare, he seemed to be whizzing forward. He had all the speed. He had all the, in a way, he had all the means to get to the finish line really quickly. But he started to rest in the middle and he got distracted here and there. And then, but when you look at the tortoise was so slow, you know, but the tortoise didn't stop. And the tortoise kept going slowly but surely, slowly but surely. And that story kind of made me think about the fact that, you know what, if I just carry on, if I can just have the endurance, you know, I think what people nowadays call grit or endurance, or, you know, that the consistency, I will get there in the end, even if it ends up taking longer. And alhamdulillah, even though you're presenting it as though it's like an amazing thing to have completed 2 Alimiyyahs, for me, it took a long time, you know, and like I recently reached the age of 40, so subhanAllah, you know, so for me it was like, although it took a long time, it was about being patient and doing things properly. I think that was really important to me. So the question of why did I do 2, okay, isn't the reason. There's a reason behind that. It's not because I'm like trying to gather certificates, right? It's not that. The reason was that when I first set out to Egypt when I was 16 to study Arabic and Islamic studies, I went to Al-Azhar, and my aim was to complete studying Sharia at Al-Azhar. But due to some problems and some issues, like health issues within my family, I had to return to the UK. And I had to continue here. So in my mind, I always wanted to study Islamic studies classically rather than at university, right? So academically speaking, I could have gone to SOAS, for example. I could have gone to any Western Islamic studies institution, right? But for me, I wanted teachers who had iman, who had faith. I wanted ulama, basically. I wanted scholars who, they're not just there teaching Islamic studies as an academic exercise, but as a nurturing and the tarbiyah aspect as well. So I've been looking for all help, trying to help me get into universities abroad in Arab countries, but it didn't work out. So when these institutions started appearing in the UK, I just wanted to grab that opportunity. But also, because the institutions in the UK, right, what I found was that some institution had one strength and another institution had another strength, right? And sometimes something that was missing in one could be found in the other, and vice versa. So the reason why I did both is because I felt like as a scholar I needed both in order to get a proper, rounded Islamic education, you know.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah.
I think it's been a very, very interesting journey, and like you said, although it might have felt slow to you, you know, when you look at your achievements, I think most people would say that the achievements are beyond what most people do. So it's amazing. One thing I wanted to ask you, and this is something that a lot of people might not know, you know, as someone who's a parent now of young children myself, you know, one of the things we dream of is our children memorizing the Qur'an and stuff. And I just wanted to, before we move away from education, just talk a little bit about that, because alhamdulillah, I think it's very, very impressive that I feel that you and Brother Salim have done an amazing job in achieving that, like having a child which is a hafiz in this country, and by that I mean the UK, you know, without going abroad and spending years there and this and that. So just give us a few words of wisdom for mothers and parents who, you know, want to achieve what you've achieved with your son, and doing it in a place like the UK.
So from quite a young age, I thought when I have children, I want them to be hafiz of Quran. I want them to memorize Quran, because I'd listened to these lectures, and I think it was one of the shuyukh, you know, who'd really, I don't know about you, but back in the day we used to listen to like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, and he was always talking about how amazing the Muslim community used to be, right? And how amazingly educated children were, and like a small child could memorize the whole Quran. And I remember feeling very inspired by that as a teenager. and thinking, when I have children, I really want them to do hifz. But I think the reality was that in the UK, there was like very few, unless you live in East London, maybe, I don't know, especially in certain areas, it's not that easy to find a hifz teacher. So initially, I would say I think it was really important that I could teach my child, you know, because I think, look, if you can teach your child every single day, nothing beats that, you know, than going to a class once a week. It's just not the same intensity, right? So when it came to learning to read the Quran and also memorizing the last part of the Quran, the 30th juz, I did that with my children at home, okay? But then when they started getting to a certain age, I would say around 7, 8, I started thinking, you know, especially with my boys, I felt like they needed someone external, you know, like a murabbi, preferably a man, you know, a male teacher who could really motivate them and give them that, and also maybe a class that could give them a sense of belonging and motivation, because obviously, like, memorizing the Quran, over time, it can be quite an effort, you know, to stay motivated, especially for a young person.
Yeah.
So we kept trying to motivate them by, for example, when they reached a certain milestone, we'd celebrate, right? We'd have a celebration, or we'd give them gifts. But apart from that, I think they needed that peer group. So I just started phoning around loads of people, and everyone was saying to me, no, there isn't anyone, until one sheikh, he told me there is a brother in Harrow, like, which is like an hour's drive away or 40 minutes drive away. And so I phoned that person, and that person agreed as long as we would bring our child to his house. And so we started doing that, but it was really far away, and it was after school, which meant my son was falling asleep, and it was getting hard. And then one day my husband just had enough, you know, because it was just like really, you can imagine like being in traffic for an hour after school, each way, every right? Day, yeah. With a child who's still quite young, you know, like he's still primary school age, and falling asleep in the car. And after a while, it was getting really like difficult. So my husband walked into the mosque, and he talked to the local mosque, and they said, you know what, we actually used to have a hifz class in this mosque, but we ended it because the teachers left. But now we've got the staff again, and we were thinking of staff. You know, maybe the fact that your son is like at this stage and ready to go, maybe that could be a motivation for us to start it up again. And so they did, alhamdulillah. And that was like literally 5-10 minutes away from home. So that's where my son began to carry on going, and you know, but for me it was about making a lot of dua. I think anytime you get to a stage where you have a dream, so even I'll give you the example of even the fact that I wanted to do Islamic studies. I wanted to complete my Islamic studies, and I wanted to get married when I was 19. I couldn't tell how I would be able to do both of those things. And I remember just making that dua, and on both occasions, that, oh Allah, I don't know how I can do this, but I want to do both of these things. You know, I want to be able to do this thing, and I don't have the means. I can't tell where the means are, but nothing is too difficult for you. So, oh Allah, somehow let this thing happen. You know, and that's been my dua. I think anytime something seemingly impossible has turned up, you know. But then obviously after you make that dua, you want to take some action. You want to do your best, you know, get resourceful. But then once you do that, I've just found that the doors start opening up. And alhamdulillah, I think that's really what happened. We made that dua. We kept saying to Allah that this is our intention. Please, Ya Allah, we are kind of giving our child to you, We're giving our child to you. We're giving the most precious thing in our life, our time, our children, our resources. We want to serve you with them, so make it easy for us to find a way to do that. And I think if you have the patience and you don't give up, the doors slowly start opening.
MashaAllah, amazing. May Allah bless them. That's amazing. So I want to kind of move the discussion over now, away from education slightly, and more towards like authorship. Because I know that you've done an amazing job, mashallah, in releasing the book Khadijah, Mother of History's Greatest Nation. So that book has been amazing. And I've got to say from my side, I'm really, really happy to see books like this, because my children are now getting to the age where they're starting to be able to read full books on their own, right? And they read all kinds of books, and Issa's like a really weird one. He likes like Diary of a Wimpy Kid and crazy kind of stuff like that.
Yeah.
But we're trying to introduce Islamic books. So recently I went to a bookstore in Pakistan where I'm currently traveling, and I saw this book, and it said the seerah, the golden seerah for the Prophet ﷺ for the younger generation. Right? So I was really happy. I was like, this is perfect. Issa can read this. I bought the book, right? I took it home and I started reading it, and it was like someone had taken an Arabic book and poorly translated it into English, right? And so for parents, it's very, very difficult to find great books written by native English speakers with that kind of mindset. And I think you've done an amazing job with Khadijah radiallahu anha's book. And tell us a little bit about the book, and then tell us about the upcoming books that you're planning to write as well, inshallah. Sister Fatima, you there?
Yeah, you just froze for a few minutes.
Okay, so I was just saying that with the Khadijah book, you've done an amazing job with that. So tell us a little bit about how did that come about, and also tell us a little bit about the books you're intending to write soon, inshallah, or you're working on.
Okay, so the Khadijah book, I've got it here, by the way.
Amazing, yeah.
For anyone who wants to have a look. The Khadijah book, at some point I had written a children's book, and I'd sent it to a publishing company, and I put so much effort into it, and they sent it straight back telling me that it was not very good. So that was a few years before the Khadijah book, and I started thinking, you know what, maybe I need to get better at writing and not think of children's book writing as an easy thing, which I think I was thinking. And so by then I'd read a lot of children's books because I was reading to my kids, right? Roald Dahl. I actually studied English literature as well, at college. So for my A-levels, and I loved English literature, all the different books, Dickens, Shakespeare, Keats, the poets, and, all that kind of thing. And what happened was just one day out of the blue, and I know this doesn't really happen to a lot of authors, okay? So it's not typical. But one day, a publisher, the publisher, brothers are here, he contacted me out of the blue, and he said, Sister Fatima, we're looking for a writer, or an author, or a writer, but all, and you can research Islamic studies topics, and and I thought, well, that's me, that fits me perfectly. And he said, we've got a number of things we're looking at in terms of projects. So could you send us a sample of, he said, if you were going to write about the life of Umar bin al-Khattab, for example, radiallahu anhu, then can you send us like a chapter, a sample of the sort of style that you'd write it in? Okay. So, that kind of got me excited. I think sometimes, when I think one of the skills all of us, or one of the practices we all need to develop is the practice of not being so rigid with our schedules, right? And with our goals, that we don't allow new things to come into our lives, positive new things. You have to be open to good things coming into your life that you didn't plan, and that's kind of been my philosophy. So, and projects I've ever been involved with have been things that just came out of the blue, but that I said yes to, because I guess as long as you have like a long-term vision, right, you do know that these things fit into the sort of work that you want to do, right? But they don't have to necessarily be exactly what you had planned. I didn't really think that my first book would be a children's book. I'd kind of given up on the idea of a children's book, and I'd thought, okay, I want to write books for adults. And I was writing for magazines, Islamic magazines and things like that. But this opportunity came along, and the publisher said to me, what about the lives of the great women of Islam? He said he did some market research. So, obviously the parents that were his customers, and the thing that they were asking for the most was books for girls, and especially female, like female role models from our past. So in a way, we knew that this was something that was needed, right? Because the customers had already expressed that. And I think it's always really helped me to have a deadline for stuff, like often we have dreams, we have things that we would like to get around to doing one day, someday. But for me, even just like having this discussion with you today, having that deadline that I knew that, okay, at this time I'm going to have to be ready, the camera and certain things have to be set up. It helps me, because what that does is, it makes it more concrete, I guess. On Khadijah first, I think the great thing about the project was that the publisher, that he really kind of put a lot of faith in me, I think, in terms of, okay, let's see where this goes. So instead of having a very rigid idea at the beginning, he did have an idea. But once I started actually the creating process, I think the whole project evolved. He would give me feedback. I think probably the first draft of the book was really, especially the first chapters, were probably not very good at all. But he would give me feedback, and then I would go away. I would read books by Roald Dahl and Charles Dickens, and and to get me in the zone, I think. And then I would start writing. I also benefited from this book that you once recommended to me, Brother Mohammed. It was called The One Thing. And the way I benefited from it was not that I thought that there was only one thing that I would do, like in my life, but that at time, if you can have laser sharp focus on one thing, you can get some amazing results. So during that period, I kind of really asked my family and my husband to allow me to spend like a whole day at the library every week. Okay. And I'm talking from morning till night, till closing time. Because what I found was I needed laser sharp focus, because once you get into the writing process, if you have to come out of it and go back to your ordinary life, your everyday life, it's really hard to get back into that place where you were. So it's better to kind of stay there as long as possible. And that's what really helped me. So having solid days, where from morning till evening, I even used to pray at the library, I had my prayer mat. And one of the libraries even had a prayer room. So alhamdulillah, we've got so many resources now. I literally spent the day there. And I wrote this book, and what I would do is I would just imagine myself as a child and what kind of book I would have loved to read. I was that child. This book is for the child that I was, I think. My dad used to go around looking for, Islamic books for me. And you can imagine in the 80s, there was nothing, right? There was just there literally were only translations. But I remember once my dad bought me a book about Fatima radiallahu anha. And because my name was Fatima, that meant a lot to me. So I would lap up, any book that he gave me. But I remember reading that book and feeling really depressed afterwards as a child, because the way it was, first of all, it was written in a very basic and, dry way, just factual. And also, it did not really take care of the reader's emotions, I would say.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I remember when we were doing the Seeds of Change conference, we would always ask, how do we want people to feel, right, at the end of this talk? Or how do we want them to feel at the end of this experience? And I kind of used that for the book as well, I thought to myself, how it's actually more important how the child is left feeling, having read the book, than it is what exactly they read, the little details, right? So for me, it was about showing children that, yes, these great people of the past, they had difficult lives. Okay, it's not that they did not have difficult lives, and it's not that they didn't face difficult things. But their story is not a tragedy, it's not. And sometimes that's the way the stories were kind of portrayed when we were kids, at the end they die and then it's really sad, and, they were poor and they had, that kind of left you sort of feeling like, basically you didn't feel uplifted. You didn't feel uplifted. And so what I wanted to do is not shy away from the difficult things. Okay, so for example, Khadijah radiallahu anha, she went through a lot, right? For the sake of Islam, she suffered a lot. But at the same time, she had this wonderful romance, right? She had this wonderful marriage. She had the right mindset with which to live life. She also ultimately knew what her goal was, right? Which was Jannah. And she knew that ultimately she was striving for true success. So I wanted to convey all of that as well. And I really hope that I've been able to do that. The thing that gives me hope is that now when I'm, sometimes I do school visits and talk about the book, and people want to buy a copy of the book. Now the girls are coming back and saying, where's the next book, right? So I really need to get on with it. And I think that's really been the best, the greatest thing out of it, that a lot of, especially girls, but not only girls, but especially girls, have come up to me and they've really said, it's given their view of what Islam goes.
So you just repeat that last point, sister. They've come up to you and they've said it's given them what?
It's given them a different narrative regarding what it is to be a Muslim woman, right? Where I think, sometimes Islam is presented as a bunch of rules to people, right? But actually, it's a worldview. It's a way of looking at the world. It's a way of adapting yourself. But also, it's a vision that you have, right? And I think for young people, if we cannot inspire them to know what that greater prize is, it's going to be hard for them to get through this life, right? So I'm hoping that books like this, you know, I've tried to put things in there, like, for example, all the aspects of Tawheed that we would want our children to know, you know, prophethood, intimate moments, I think, with Khadijah and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to give them an idea of what true as well. All those things can be in a book. I would say I didn't have the skills to write a great book when I started. But I think what I realized is I had to learn those skills, and I just had to develop and just become good at it. And so I would write 5 chapters at a time and submit them and then get feedback. But then also what I did was I actually printed the book out, the chapters out, and I would sit back and read it out aloud to myself. And that really helped, you know, because it's not just about what you're reading, it's about how it sounds, how it's going to come across. So yeah, I really enjoyed the process. There were difficult times, like, you know, but it was very much sort of this beautiful story I really want to share with young people. They've got to know this story, and they've got to feel what I'm feeling about this story. So yeah, it's been really, really good experience, mashallah.
Mashallah. I love what you said about, like, thinking about how they left at the end of the book and stuff, because when you look at history, obviously, you know, when you look at long-term history, everyone ends up dying anyway, you know, so to kind of leave them with something positive and all of that stuff is great. You know, it's interesting because obviously you're really catering and you're really leading the way, mashallah, for women. And I think, like, what's really interesting, this is why I kind of consider you a journalist as well, because, you know, you've done a lot of stuff on mainstream TV, on BBC, on Channel 4. You've been on radio. You've written for lots of things. So tell me a little bit about what's it like to be a Muslim woman when it comes to the media, when it comes to doing these different programs and appearing on this stuff. Like, what's it like being a Muslim woman? How do you kind of go about, like, speaking for women when you know that, you know, maybe you're perceived in such a different way?
I think there's 2 different sides to it. Okay, there's the aggressive political, you know, kind of rhetorical side to it. Okay, which I've actually moved away from. Okay, so initially I would have accepted. So when there was some big story in the news, right, about the niqab or anything to do with Muslim women, I would get a flurry of phone calls, and people would encourage me to go on. And after having a couple of experiences of that, I realized that actually I need to be selective, you know, about the kinds of media appearances and contributions that I accept. And that wasn't a bad thing, you know, because sometimes people feel like any publicity is good, but actually that's not actually the case, because sometimes the format of a show is such that you're literally being used as a soundbite. You're just like entertainment. You're entertainment. That's all you are. And I'm not interested in that. You know, I'm interested in having real conversations. I think that's one of the great things about podcasts, where you actually have extended conversations, right? And sometimes I even think that, you know, some of the kind of debate type things that we sometimes took part in the past, some of the people who were brought as opponents, I guess, I think I would really get on with them, probably, you know, if we met in a real setting or even a podcast setting. Because actually, when I follow their work, and I think I agree with a lot of stuff that they say, or at least I can appreciate where they're coming from, you know, whereas mainstream media can often be like just about sound bites and about, like I said, entertainment. So I think one of the things I learned from that experience is to be selective, but also to set the terms, for what exactly do I want my contribution to be. So I began to only accept the sorts of requests that, first of all, treated me as sort of an expert, right? So, for example, I got invited onto BBC Radio 4 as author of Khadijah, about the life of Khadijah, or about any aspect of Islam, right? And I started accepting more of those kind of requests, and even in written media, and I think that I feel a lot more comfortable with that, because I think I really don't enjoy, but also I don't really feel that it's the space for me personally to be the one who's always putting out fires, and doing things according to somebody else's agenda, somebody else's narrative, the way they want to frame it, So if somebody wants to have an extended conversation with me, if somebody wants to call me as an expert or somebody who knows about this topic, fine. Those are the sorts of things that I'm accepting. But I've kind of moved away from the kind of debate type setups. I'm not saying that the other people shouldn't do them. It could be that other people are more suited to that. But for me personally, I think it's time to stop being the only thing we talk about is niqab, for example, or the only thing we talk about is hijab. I want to go beyond that, So there's that aspect. But then also, like, presenting a podcast, that's been very, I would say, beneficial. It's been very cathartic, because I think there's so many conversations that sisters have and brothers have, we have in private, or we have in other settings, that other people could benefit from. And sometimes as a Muslim, because you don't see or you don't hear people from your background out there, having a conversation and conveying things through that, you can start feeling quite lonely. Like, am I the only one who thinks this? Am I the only one who's feeling this? And there's something amazing about conversations that I think is more powerful than speeches even, You hear two people kind of going back and forth, not necessarily always agreeing with each other, but sort of working through an issue together. And it helps you think more clearly as well, I think. So I've really enjoyed the kind of extended podcast type media, I would say. Before presenting the podcast, I used to do Ramadan radio as well sometimes. So I already had experience in that. But I think from a young age, I knew that people had misconceptions about Islam, and that it was our duty to remove those misconceptions. So when these opportunities came along for contributing to the media, although I would say it would be beneficial to have media training and those kinds of things, I think in a way I just felt naturally that I should contribute, where I can.
I think this is a point I want to kind of touch up on, because one of the things we kind of really talk about is leadership, and as a scholar, as a journalist, as someone who's kind of done all of this, like, who's a leader that's really kind of inspired you?
So would you say somebody who's alive today?
Yeah, it could be someone alive today, it could be someone in the past.
You know what? I find inspiration from so many people. I'd say a few people who've really stood out. I think my mum has stood out a lot. One of the funny things about my mum, I think I learned a lot from her, because when I was in Egypt, there was a lot of admin that used to get, you couldn't get things done in Egypt, right? There was like so much red tape, so much, and people would always say to you, tomorrow, come back tomorrow, right? And my mom came and stayed with me for a little while. And I remember her always kind of never accepting that, and she would say to them, no, we want it now. We want it now. We want it sorted out now. And so one of the things I learned from my mom was speaking up and not just settling, not just kind of being too agreeable about everything, And I think that was really good, because not everyone in my family is like that. And so sometimes you need to have that person who's like not willing to just go, okay, everything's fine, but willing to sort of go a bit further than that. So, my mom has always been a role model, because every community we moved to, we moved quite a lot, she would start a Qur'an class, and the neighborhood's children would just turn up, and be in our house and learning Qur'an. So I saw from her that, you could be do something good, wherever you go. Apart from, my parents, I would say I had to spend some days with Dr. Farhat Hashmi, in Bahrain, and it's one of those things I could never have planned, and I didn't plan, but just spending a few days with her and seeing the impact of her work, because I've got relatives in India who are not necessarily very practicing, in our extended family, but they started going to Dr. Farhad's classes, right? Like they started going to Al-Huda classes in India. And these are like sort of middle class or upper middle class ladies who traditionally it's quite hard to get them to get into religious things, right? But for some reason, there was something powerful there that they found, that they actually, it kind of became fashionable, for these educated, university educated and sometimes even like PhD type level women who were educated in English school systems and stuff to suddenly start going to these Quran classes, right? And just spending time with her, because I could see that what she'd done was patiently, she was not a complainer, I think it's really easy for us to work with different organizations or settings and then find them lacking and then feel like, oh, well, that's that, right? But when she she told me about how she used to teach, I'm not sure which university in Pakistan. She began teaching there after she had finished her studies, and they wouldn't allow her to teach the way she wanted. And so she just hired a classroom, right? And she started doing her own classes outside, and I really liked that approach. I like the fact that she's a woman who's making a lot of impact and who's caused a lot of impact, but she doesn't have a chip on her shoulder. Do you know what I mean? She's not complaining about men, for example. Which is kind of sometimes, it's easy for sisters to fall into that, complain about how the brothers don't value them, blah, 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 whatever. She is that sort of person who actually, you don't need to complain, just get up, take responsibility, take some action, and move things positively the way you want. So I found that very inspiring. Once we were in a setting together where there were a lot of sisters, we were being awarded something. It's a bit be awarded something on the same level as Dr. Farhat, because, compared to what she's done, subhanAllah, it was a bit embarrassing to even be there, to be honest. But we were both and we were surrounded by women who were, not necessarily dressed in the correct way, right? Like exposing exposing themselves, and there were a lot of photographers, and you know, it was very kind of showbiz, you know, and I was getting quite annoyed by the whole thing, because I was thinking, what's the point of inviting us and awarding us something, and you don't even respect the hijab, you know, like, apart from me and Dr. Farhad, everyone else was kind of very much, you know, showing their beauty, that kind of thing, right? So it was a bit Dr. Farhad, and I said to her, you know, I don't like this setting. I don't feel happy here, because I feel like we can't say anything, right? I can't say anything, but at the same time, they're trying to respect us, but they're not really learning from us, you know, like from our example. And I remember Dr. Farhad saying very calmly to me, she said, look, she said, our very presence here is speaking volumes. So I really liked that, you know, I really respected her for that, and I realized that, you know, when you're young, you feel quite emotional, you know, you react in a very emotional way, and it feels like it's, you know, you've got the truth, and you're like, other people are wrong, and you know, and I realized I need to kind of rein that back a bit, and look at the bigger picture, you know, and sometimes just as we said, you know, progress can be very slow in life. Even our impact on the world can be slow, but it doesn't mean there is no impact, you know. So,
okay, amazing.
Yeah, I learned a lot from her. So, but I also love reading biographies and autobiographies all the time, you know. I just finished, what's her name? Michelle Obama's autobiography, right? I read Oprah Winfrey's recently. I actually really loved Barack Obama's autobiography, perhaps just as it was actually written in a very beautiful way as well. But, you know, I don't think it matters who the person is so much. It's just reading and experiencing that journey and the difficulties they faced along the way, you know, and how they overcame them, and how maybe seemingly strange things that happened to them actually ended up benefiting them. I just love reading that journey, you know.
Okay, so when you kind of take all of your reading, you take all of the kind of Islamic knowledge you've got and everything, and someone comes to you and says, look, what is leadership for you? And is it different for a woman in terms of leadership in general? I just want to get your thoughts on leadership in general, really, and if it's different for women.
I think one of the du'as that we say, isn't it, when we have children and when we have a family, we say, رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ وَجَعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. That, oh Allah, Rabbana hab lana, make our wives and our spouses and our children the coolness of our eyes, and make us leaders of the righteous. And I remember I was reflecting on that one day, and I was thinking, so everyone is supposed to make that dua, right? So everyone, leaders, and so I think my understanding of leadership has evolved over time. Initially, I used to think of it as being I remember at school we had this thing called Young Enterprise, where for 2 weeks we had to run a company in the school, within the school. Each class had to set up a company and run it. And we did a stationery company. And I really wanted to be the CEO of the company, right? And this is like, we were probably like 15 at the time, right? And I had the skills. I felt like I had the skills. I had the know-how, and I had the printer as well at home, right? Because we were doing stationery. But I didn't get voted as the CEO, right? As the project manager. And that was really disappointing for me, temporarily, because obviously, like, the most popular girl in the class, we were in a girls' school, so the most popular girl in that class got voted as the CEO. So I thought, well, she doesn't have the qualities, but okay, so she's popular, you know? Okay, great. So I had to work under her, but I ended up she ended up constantly referring to me anyway, right? And one of the things that I learned from that whole process was, you don't have to be the one on, you know, who seemingly is the one on the top to be a leader, you know. Being a leader is about doing the right thing that you need to do with the next step that you need to take. I think that's one aspect of leadership that. So the reason why I say that is, sometimes leadership for me has been saying no to things because my children need me, you know? And for me, that's leadership, because if I don't lead the way in making that decision, I can get carried into all sorts of glamorous looking projects and, you know, but then my children will suffer, my household will suffer. So I think in every decision we make, there's an aspect of leadership. One area of leadership that I think I've been late to learning about, and I'm really trying to develop, is one that one of my mentors, Brother Nabil Al-A'zami, who recently passed away, I think he really opened my eyes to this one, this being a weakness of mine, actually, which I need to develop more, which is servant leadership, you know, servant leadership. And it sounds like an oxymoron, right? But one of the things I realized is very easy when you have natural leadership qualities, and people often push you forward to lead things and, you know, to step up. It can be very easy for you to forget about people who are working in your project, who maybe don't get so much kind of recognition, you know? And it's very easy, if people see you as a role model, to start expecting people to carry your bag, for example, them to do things for you. And you just get into that negative habit, that bad habit, especially if you've like been abroad and you've been the guest for X organization or that. Everyone's carrying your bags for you. Everyone's bringing you tea. Everyone, you know, it's really easy for you to start then, when you're in another setting, start expecting that. And you're like, how come you haven't made tea for me? You know, how come this? And that should never really happen, right? That shouldn't happen. That means you've been so spoiled that you are not doing things for yourself. So that aspect of leadership is one that it takes, for me, it takes a lot of mindfulness. I think that, it's just natural for the nafs to start expecting that, you know. So it's time I was at a very basic kind of Islamic gathering, or a basic, I noticed I started getting a bit annoyed when certain things were not offered, like my bags, right? But then I realized, no, that's wrong. You know, you're supposed to carry your own bags. You know, you're supposed to be as self-sufficient as you can be, right? There's the example of, I think it was Umar bin al-Khattab radiyallahu anhu, who, you know, once when I think it was like the what do you call it? The thing that you pull your horse with, or your camel with, it fell. Yeah, the rein. And he got off and he lifted it up, and, you know, and to somebody poor who was entitled to it, and to him, we can do that for you. And he said, will you carry my burden on the day of judgment? But also just generally knowing from, stories of the scholars of the past. There's this famous story of like scholars in Deoband, in India, where in the night when everyone was asleep, the sheikh used to come and he used to clean all the bathrooms when nobody was there, right? So doing things that like keep you humble. I remember my dad used to say, you should fix shoes, tidy up the shoes, when you go to a place. Like do things that kind of remind you that you're you're a human being like everyone. And I think that's something that I have to be very mindful of. It doesn't come naturally to me. It doesn't come that naturally. So I think leadership is about being aware, becoming very self-aware as well. But I think the definition of leadership that I like, the aspect of leadership that really I find most meaningful is asking yourself, what does Allah? Sometimes it could be something as simple as a family crisis, right? There's something happening in the family and people aren't thinking straight. Somebody needs to say, look, we need to sort this out. We need to have a family meeting. Somebody needs to maybe bring some fresh thinking to the situation. Sometimes it could be taking leadership in your community with some need that arises. So I think probably when I was younger, I used to think leadership was all about being the person in charge. But now I can see very well that, Brother Mohammad, myself and you, the first time we kind of came across each other's, our organization that we were both in. I think one of the beautiful things about that Dawah organization was it was full of leaders. It was as if every person in that Dawah organization was a leader, right? And I'm not exaggerating when I say that, because the brother who was in charge of marketing, he was a leader. The brothers who used to come and help with the events, right? They would add that, they would add so much passion to what they were doing. Even the brothers who were editing the videos, they would add something of themselves in there. So I must say that probably working for that with those people like what leadership is really like.
So you said you just got cut off a little bit. You were just saying that you got cut off a little bit. It froze a little bit. You were just saying that in the Dawah organization, you felt like everyone was a leader, and no matter what they were doing, they were bringing their leadership there. So what was the impact of that?
Yeah. Oh, the impact of that was, so even if we just take the example of the conference that we did, right? So we had the Seeds of Change conference.
Yeah.
I wasn't involved with the conference, but she phoned me out of the blue and she said, look, I don't know how to do this conference. I don't know what direction to take this conference in. I don't know what content the conference should have, and I need you to help me with that. I need you to do that, basically, to set. It was like being handed a plate, right? And being told, what do you want us to do? We'll do it, right? And we'll put it into practice. And so that sister, the sister who was the manager of the event, everyone who worked under her in her team, subhanallah, everyone just just wanted to bring their best to the table. I don't know if it was because of the personalities of the people who were involved, you know, or if it was because we were all working towards a bigger vision. I think that's probably what it was, you know. I think in that Dawah organization, the vision of, you know, we are conveying the message of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We are doing the work that the Prophet would have wanted us to do, sharing the message of Islam, helping people to, you know, saving people basically from the hellfire. I think that vision was so well articulated and also so well instilled in everyone who was involved that it just brought out the best in you. It didn't matter if you were the person who was fixing the chairs up, right? Or if you were the one who was like presenting on stage, or like many of the brothers, the sound person, or the person who was you know, making adverts, or whatever it was. It just felt like everyone was so kind of unified in their goal and purpose. There was this synergy, amazing synergy. And I don't know about you, Brother Mohammed, but I often think about that Dawah organization and its culture, and how to capture that culture and take it to other places, you know, other projects. Is it something that we can reproduce? Probably, it probably is. But I'd like to kind of figure out exactly what the kind of formula was, you know, to bring that kind of synergy and culture to an organization, because I'm sure you'll agree it was beautiful. There was a very beautiful aspect to that culture that probably has stayed with us.
Yeah. I mean, for me, that organization was like probably the best bunch of brothers I've ever worked with in my life. And I've worked with some amazing brothers over the last 15, 20 years in the Muslim organizations and stuff. I think it's a lot of what you said. I think that the vision that they had was amazing. You know, Islam entering every home. We were all completely unified. We had amazing people in there, but they didn't let their egos get in the way, like most of the time, right? 99% of the time, the egos were out the window. It doesn't matter if you're Abdurrahim or if you're the guy who's fixing the chairs, like you said. Like, everyone was completely unified. I think timing was good. Like, everyone in their life was coming at a different time. I felt like everyone had total ownership. Like, you know how you're talking about leadership? They owned their area. Like, I always think about brothers like Jamal was on his own, trying to do all the video and all the photography and everything all on his own, right? And he's the guy who's lifting his bags at the end of the night and everything. And then you got all the volunteers who would come and they would unpack the van when everyone's gone home at 2 a.m. They're at Crown House unpacking. And it was just completely amazing, I think, as an environment. And I think that it definitely can be replicated. But it's a very tough thing to do, because you've got to synergize the vision with the people, with the timing, with the resources, and everything. But alhamdulillah, it's an amazing journey, and I think everyone that was part of it, they really look back at it as a wonderful time. I mean, it was never ever completely painless, or we didn't have problems. We had problems. Like every conference we were doing, we were having problems and stuff. But you know, you're doing it for the sake of Allah. You're united together. And yeah, alhamdulillah, it was a great time, I think everyone felt.
100%. I feel the same, like some of the most amazing personalities, you know, just you got to work with them and they just brought excellence to their work. And I think once you've experienced that, you know what's possible, you know. And so even when you move on from that or move on to other projects, you want to capture that and you want to bring that to the project. I don't know if you know how I got involved with that era. It's quite funny, actually, how I got involved with that organization. And it's amazing because what you just said is so true, like the right place at the right time with the right people, you know? So when I was a student in Egypt,
I was reading these books about aspects of like Muslims in Arab countries and things like that, about women especially. And these books were really depressing. Like, they really made you start thinking, subhanAllah, is that all women are in these Muslim countries? The way Islam is, this isn't Islam, is it? You know, it really got me, it started to affect me in a negative way. And a sister who was in Egypt at the time, she was from Birmingham, she was a British sister. She one day came back from, you know, having visited the UK, and she came back with all these videos. And, you know, this is in the days of videos, right? VHS videos, right? And they were basically dawah in the park, okay? And she put them on, and we would sit in the Arabic center that we were at, and after classes had finished, and she'd put these videos on, and we'd watch Abdurrahim Green in the park, right? Doing dawah to all these people and building up an amazing argument. And I remember feeling my iman so strengthened by watching those videos, you know, and just following that very logical, very well argued, very conscious argument. And I remember thinking, wow, I wish I'd known all of this when I was at school, because my friends at school used to ask me these questions, right? And so we watched Dawah in the Park. And I remember when I got back to the UK thinking, Hyde Park, that's like round the corner. I should go there. You know, maybe people still do Dawah there, right? So I started going to Hyde Park just to kind of watch people do Dawah. And it just so happened that when I first went, this guy with white robes and a ladder and long hair was walking on a pathway in Hyde Park. And I thought, that's him. That's that's the guy in the videos, right? And by the way, I never spoke to him at all. I never spoke to him at all. I literally just wanted to hear the arguments again because they were so compelling. And so I watched, you know, and he would put his ladder out and he would stand up on the ladder, step ladder, with his thobe and, you know, obviously really standing out in the middle of London, right? And he would just talk and people would just gather around him and he would build up an argument for why you must believe in Allah, why the Prophet was the Prophet, and, you know, basically go rap, you know, the Dawah methodology that we used to teach in that Dawah organization. So I remember just going there sometimes and just listening to, and even there were other da'is as well, but not as much as there are now. You know, now it's become like normal for people to go there, but at that time there were hardly any Muslims who would. But anyway, over time, so that was the first time I kind of came across Sheikh Abdurrahim Green. But again, I never spoke to him or anything, you know. And then years later, when I had children, and he had a blog online, a Dawah blog. And one day I sent an article to the blog about ways that women could do Dawah, right? And he really liked that article. He published it. So again, it was just like kind of from a distance, you know. And then one day I just got an email and it said, look, I'm going to start a new organization, and I'd like there to be some sisters involved, but I can't think of many, you know. I can think of you, so would you like to come to this meeting, right, that we're going to have? And it was like some restaurant in London somewhere. And I said, well, I'll bring my husband with me, you know. And that was the kind of the first meeting where Aira was discussed. And I think it was the first time that Brother Hamza Yusuf Chambers, Abdurrahim, myself. I can't remember who else. I think, and my husband was there as well. And we were just in a place together, you know, and yeah, and it just started from there. Subhanallah. So I think what you're saying is right. You know, it was the place, the time, the time in everyone's lives, a strange way for us all to have even gotten to know of each other, you know. It wasn't really, I don't know, it wasn't very kind of typical, if you like, of how you would set up an organization. It was more kind of, just come along, you know, and let's see what happens. Sort of. That's how it felt anyway.
Yeah. It like
but that. I'm sure that they did have a very strong, they had a very strong idea, especially Sheikh Abdurrahim, of what dawah should look like, you know, and what wasn't happening and what was happening in other religious communities. So, for example, the Christian missionaries and how our deen deserved better, you know, and there needed to be people focused on this. And to be honest, I felt like that was a visionary at a time when a lot of Muslim communities were kind of obsessed with minutiae. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Where you're putting your hands in prayer and stuff like that, right? But also just happy to just be doing their own thing, you know? As long as my family's okay, as long as I'm keeping up with my prayers and I'm doing my thing. At that sort of time, I think it was really amazing that somebody was thinking about the bigger picture, the whole point of Islam, right? In the UK. And the reason why it really resonated with me is because ever since I was a child, I'd been asked questions about Islam. I'd been asked questions about my hijab. I'd heard arguments against God. And I'd known that the answers were there. Sometimes I'd even known the answers, but I couldn't always articulate it in the best way. But I had to learn to articulate it. And I wanted people to know about Islam. I wanted them to know about the blessing of Islam. And I could see the harm in people's lives when Islam wasn't present, when guidance wasn't present. And that's at every stage. Like, I remember when we were in Hackney, my next door neighbor was this lady who, she was a battered wife, basically. Her husband used to be in and out of prison. And, you know, whenever I looked at the people who lived around us, whether it was in Hackney, even in Barnet, you know, people may have been more privileged, but to me, in their psychology, they were not privileged. They had all sorts of psychological problems, pressures, especially girls. They had all sorts of pressures on them that sometimes they used to confide in me with, you know, because they didn't see me as part of that cultural, as under that cultural pressure. So sometimes they would confide in me. And what I found was that the people were suffering due to a lack of guidance in their lives. And whenever I looked at my parents and whenever I read about Islam, one of the books that had a huge impact was a book by Abdul Wahid Hamid called Islam, the Natural Way, which I read as a teenager. And he just took you from the beginnings of Islam, from the beginning of, you know, you found yourself here on this earth. So how do you make sense of it? From that to, you know, the Qur'an and Sunnah, he took you on that journey in such a beautiful way that I just felt, wow, people need to know about this. You know, I wish more people knew about this. And so I would sometimes give a copy of the Qur'an to a teacher, or I would, you know, it just came naturally in a way. I tried to convert people as well, like at school, you know. I remember my geography teacher, Allah, I sent him a letter when I'd left, encouraging him to become a Muslim, and subhanallah. And he was very gracious about it. maybe I was a bit clumsy in my approach, but it came from a very positive place, and I think he could see that. So it just happened to be that the Dawah organization came about at a time when I think a lot of us were ready for that, and were kind of rearing to go in a way.
Yeah, well, sure. I think it's I think one of the things that they say in this book called Made to Stick, they talk about the curse of knowledge, that once you've acquired certain knowledge, it's very difficult for you to understand what it's like when you don't have the knowledge. And I think the way you've just kind of described Islam is very much like that if you think about someone who's now practicing, we kind of take the Qur'an and Sunnah for granted, right? Guidance for granted, that we feel very comfortable with it, we can read Qur'an every day, and you forget what it's like to be someone who's a human being who's lost in this world, like not knowing what
Absolutely.
on earth am I doing here. So I think it's a wonderful, wonderful point. And on that point, I think as we're kind of fast running out of time, I want to ask you, are there any books or are there any resources or anything that you recommend a lot to people? Just generally, obviously, a huge amount of your following is sisters, but I'm sure brothers can benefit as well. Are there any books or recommendations or software or anything that you think is something that other people should really check out? Apart from, obviously, Khadijah, your own book.
Well, one of the things that I benefit from a lot is watching book summaries, actually. So when you've got a lack of time, but there's this book that you've heard is amazing, and you know that the topic is something important that you need. One of the great resources we've got now is go to YouTube and look up book summaries of any book, pretty much any book, and you'll get it. And at least you can then get the kind of essence of the message of the book. You might go on to read it properly later, but I think that's a general resource that I would really recommend, and I do recommend to sisters, especially mums, they're busy, they don't have time to read all these. And sometimes, I don't know if you've noticed this, Brother Mohammed, but some of these books, they do feel like they've been padded a lot, like the essence of the message could probably have been conveyed in a few pages. But, they've kind of been padded and a lot of stuff added. And Sometimes you say, could you just tell me what the point is? Just tell me. I just want to know. Right. So book summaries are great. Audiobooks have changed my life. So probably last year and this year have been the years that I've read the most books, but audiobooks. What I do is, so I, get a book every month at least, okay, if not more. Obviously, due to my studies, I have to read books anyway. But for my own self, like things that I feel will be beneficial to me, I'll read a book a month at least, or listen to it. And what I do is I walk every morning, nearly every morning, for about half an hour to an hour, okay, straight after dropping my children to school. And in that time, I'll be listening to an audiobook. And in a way, I'll just be focusing on that,
So you probably finish like more than one book a month then if you do that. MashaAllah.
Yeah, I do. But because from university, I get so many books that I have to read anyway, that keeps me busy.
If only the university books were on Audible, right? That would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish. I even asked my professor that, actually. I said, why can't they just put these on audio? Like I could consume so much more information. But I think what I do, that period is really for me, for my own either self-development or nourishment, or even sometimes to enjoy a story, right? So it could be a biography, for example, or an autobiography. And otherwise, podcasts are amazing. Like I listen to this podcast called Full Disclosure, okay, by James O'Brien. He's a presenter, a radio presenter. The reason why I listen to his podcast, and it might seem like a bit random, right, is that he basically he takes a guest and he goes through their whole life in an hour, right? and the big lessons from their life. And they're usually somebody who's done something quite, beneficial for society, something like that. And so in 1 hour, you get the perspective of someone who maybe you're not really following or not really that interested in normal life, right? But sometimes I find such amazing nuggets of benefit from places where I wouldn't normally look, So I think keeping that sense of curiosity, that sense of spontaneity is really important. I'll give you a couple of books that, I've already mentioned The 7 Habits, right?
Yeah.
The 7 Habits, I think, is like the book that is like the bread and butter, right, of self-development.
My last guest and a few others always keep talking about 7 Habits as well. A great book, yeah, definitely.
It's the bread and butter. And I've even read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Families, which is also very beneficial. And it takes it from a completely different approach in the sense that it's the same 7 habits, but now you're really thinking about your family and having a vision for your family, treating your family as a project, and really nourishing the positive relationships in that. So that's probably the bread and butter. But apart from that, some books that I benefited from recently are Deep Work by Cal Newport. And that's because if you're somebody who wants to be successful academically, right, or even when you're working on something that takes a lot of focus, like writing a book, or actually working on any project and really getting amazing results, you need to develop a habit of deep work. So in that book, he really highlights to you the things that actually keep taking our attention away, and the benefit of having highly focused work. So that book has been really, really beneficial. He tells you about different modes of getting into that state of deep work, and you can find one that works for you. Another book that I benefited from recently is a book that is not really self-development, I would say, but I actually believe listening to beautifully written books is beneficial in itself. And that is a book by a guy called William Dalrymple, who's a historian. He's written a book called The Anarchy, and it's a wonderful audiobook as well. And it's basically about the East India Company in India.
Wow. Okay.
And so I love reading history because I think there's so much to learn from that. And so I don't think we should limit ourselves to only self-help books,
And it's interesting you say that because first of all, I want to learn a lot about the East India Company, just the way they came as a company first and then ruled the whole of India, right?
Oh, yeah.
But I think
you love that.
Yeah. The other thing is, I went to a coffee place here recently, and it's a great coffee place, quite high end for Pakistan, and the kids loved it because it was just full of books. And I picked up a book, right, which was not self-help, and I don't usually do that, and it was called Salahuddin by John Mann, his name is. And I started reading the first few chapters, and I was like so wowed by it. Like, I've forgotten what it's like to read a non-self-help book where they're actually describing something in a storytelling format. So I think it's a great idea, especially if you want to be a writer, if you want to do those kind of things, to read those non-self-help books as well. So Jazakallah khair, that's a really great recommendation as well. MashaAllah. So, and
at the moment, I must tell you, at the moment I'm listening to The Magic of Thinking Big. Amazing. Which was recommended to me by, I think it was recommended to me by you, actually.
I give that to everyone as one of the first book they should read, just because before you do anything else, you should expand your mind. So
I think the key thing is just keep reading and keep nourishing your mind and putting positive input into your mind. And, hopefully that will make for positive output.
Amazing. Sister Fatima, we've kind of run out of time, but it's been an absolute pleasure having you here today. Jazakallah khair for all of your time and wonderful advice. I know everyone watching will have loved what they've heard. You shared some amazing stories, some amazing insights, and it's wonderful to have a female alima, an alima on here as well. So Jazakallah khair for everything you said and for all your time. Brothers and sisters, this is the Muslim CEO Show. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you haven't already done so, please remember to subscribe to our channel. And also, I want to tell you that one of the things Sister Fatima does as well is she does the IlmFeed Podcast, so make sure you check that out and subscribe to that. And of course, if you go to Fatima Barkatulla, you can find FatimaBarkatulla.com. You can find out lots of information on Sister, as well as amazing YouTube videos as well. So Jazakumullah khair, guys. Inshallah, we'll see you next time. Sister, once again, thank you so much, and inshallah, we'll catch up with you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam. Jazakallah khair.